Welcome, Frankfort and Franklin County residents, and thank you for tuning in to the Candidate Forum for Circuit Judge for the 48th Circuit General Election held on November 8, 2022. I'm J.C. Young, and I'm honored to serve on the Chamber Government Affairs Committee and your moderator for this event. Circuit Court is the court of general jurisdiction that hears a high level of civil matters, capital offenses, felonies, land dispute titles, and contested probate cases. Circuit Court has the power to issue injunctions, writs of probation, writs of mandamus, to hear appeals from district court and administrative agencies. Of all 57 circuits in the Commonwealth, our own Franklin County Circuit Court, the 48th, is trusted to hear the most current and critical legal issues facing not just Franklin County, but the entire Commonwealth. In this candidate forum, we're honored to have for Circuit Judge, the 48th District, Mr. Phillip Shepard, Mr. Joe Bilby. The positions these candidates are seeking is for an 8-year term of office. They're highly complex, and they require worthy candidates such as yourselves. Before we begin, I would like to thank and recognize the Frankfort Area Chamber of Commerce for establishing this candidate forum and the Frankfort Plant Board for hosting and broadcasting this event. Serving as our esteemed panelists and those doing the real work in this function, our Frankfort Area Chamber of Commerce President and CEO, Ms. Tish Shade, Client Relationship Officer at Traditional Bank and Frankfort Area Chamber of Commerce Executive Board Member, Ms. Annabeth Bobbitt, and President and CEO of Esprit Credit Union and Chair-elect of the Frankfort Area Chamber of Commerce, Mr. John Graham. The questions they will be asking came from a survey of Chamber members. Candidates, you'll have 2 minutes for opening remarks, 2 minutes for closing remarks. You'll have 1-minute responses to questions with 30-second follow-ups if asked by panelists. You'll also have 2 opportunities to extend your time or to rebut another candidate's response. This is titled bonus time. Just signify to me that you'd like to use one of your 2, and I'll grant you that opportunity. Both of these bonus times will be 1 minute each. We had a draw prior to the forum, and opening remarks will begin with Mr. Shepard.
Thank you, J.C., and I want to join you in thanking the Chamber and the Plant Board for giving us this opportunity to discuss these important issues and this important race for the election for Circuit Judge here in Franklin County. I'm Phillip Shepard. I've had the honor of serving this community as your Circuit Judge for the last 16 years. The Franklin Circuit Court is an important part of this community, and it serves vital functions not only for this community, but for the state as a whole. As Frankfort, as the seat of state government, is the place where most state agencies are headquartered, and as a result of that, our court also has to adjudicate cases involving state agencies from environmental protection to Public Service Commission to transportation and all sorts of state regulatory matters. So that's an important part of our docket. But an equally important part of our docket is the disputes we have to resolve locally, whether they be contract disputes, whether they be medical malpractice cases or property disputes. And in all those cases, it's really critical that we have a court that's well prepared, that is experienced, and that is dedicated to giving everybody a fair shake and deciding cases expeditiously. So I grew up here in Frankfort. My father was the minister of the Methodist Church. I attended the public schools here and graduated from Frankfort High. My wife Audrey and I have raised our family here. Our grandson is a 8th grader at 2nd Street School, and we're very heavily invested in the success of this community, and we're grateful to be a part of it. And for those reasons, I ask for your vote today.
Mr. Bilby, 2 minutes, opening statements.
Well, thank you also, may I say, to our hosts. And I also want to thank the many thousands of Frankfort County residents that I've had the chance to speak to since this campaign began. You know, from the beginning, my view is that it's great when we can be on TV today, and I'm so glad for the opportunity. But there's really no substitute for face-to-face conversations with individual voters. So starting in February of last year, I took it upon myself to go out and start walking the neighborhoods of this community, knocking on doors one at a time and talking with voters. I would always start with the open-ended question of, ma'am or sir, is there anything in particular you'd like to talk to me about? And in some cases, you get responses that seem on their face to have very little to do with the workings of the Franklin Circuit Judge. They want to talk about what's going on with their family or a member who's been in trouble with the law. I've talked to people who recently celebrated the birth of a child. I've talked with voters who recently marked the death of a family member with a burial. And, those conversations may not on their face have much to do with the work of the court, but having walked those streets and knocked on those 10,000 doors since February, I have a better appreciation for this community and the people who live here than I did at the outset. And if I'm fortunate enough to win this election, I think that those thousands of face-to-face conversations will make me a better judge than I would have been without them. So I want to thank all those voters who took the time to speak with me as we go. I also spoke with some voters who had very specific concerns about the Franklin Circuit Court, concerns about judges who don't follow the law in every case, concerns about how a family member was treated in a particular case that came before that court. Those concerns matter to me as well, too, because, again, once you become a judge and you put on that black robe, you don't have as much face-to-face interaction with members of the community. It's on all of us to continue to stay involved with this community. My wife and I have been very involved in coaching youth sports and active in veterans service organizations. But I need to hear about the concerns of the voters from this town before I took office. So I'm so glad and grateful to the people for taking the time to speak with me, dating back to those conversations last winter. Thank you.
Great job on opening statements. Our first question comes from Ms. Tishade, and it's going to be addressed to you, Mr. Shepherd.
Okay. Do you believe that individuals born as males can compete as females in Kentucky high schools? Why or why not?
Well, I think that is a matter that is decided by the Kentucky High School Athletic Association, and it's within their jurisdiction. And frankly, I don't think we've had a problem with that in this community or in this state. So that's a matter that's been vested by law in the Board of Control of the Kentucky High School Athletic Association. And I think parents and coaches and school administrators, along with the High School Athletic Association, are perfectly capable of dealing with that issue.
Mr. Bilby, 1 minute.
Well, I believe the legislature considered a bill that would have made clear that a child is required to participate in the league for the sex to which he or she was born. If that law comes into play, I will follow it like I will follow any other law that should be brought in the eventuality of litigation. Those are tricky cases, though, because often a season is underway by the time the lawsuit gets filed, and so it's the responsibility of the courts to move quickly, should there be a legal challenge, to enable those young athletes to know what their rights are. So my promise on that issue and any others is that I'm going to do the simple thing and the obvious thing, which is take a look at what the law says, if there is one on the books, apply it, and deliver the outcome that the law requires. And as a father of a daughter and a son, I think it makes sense for kids to compete in separate sports once they reach a certain age for certain sports, and I'd have no problem enforcing a law that said so.
Our next question comes from Ms. Annabeth Bobbitt. It's going to be addressed to you, Mr. Bilby.
So of all 57 circuits in the Commonwealth, our own Franklin County Circuit, 48th, is trusted to hear the most current and critical legal issues facing not just Franklin County, but the entire state. Politicians and political parties come and go, but the competence and independence of the judiciary are the foundation of our society. What degree of importance would you, or do you, as Franklin County Circuit Judge, place on the fair and equitable application of the law regardless of the political fallout?
Well, I think it's critically important for the judge to understand that, just like the rest of us, he is bound and constrained by the law. Ma'am, if you do something today that violates the law, there typically will be consequences for that. Me too, as an attorney in a courtroom, if I do something that breaks a rule, I'm going to suffer a consequence. And it should be no different for our judges. So if you have a judge who properly understands himself to be bound by the law and required to do what it says, instead of tiptoeing around it or finding a way to disregard it, that's going to drain the situation out of a lot of the political excitement of the moment. Because if the facts of a case, as applied to the law as it actually exists, call for an outcome, it doesn't matter who the litigants are. It doesn't matter whether it's a Republican or a Democrat who's asking the judge for certain relief. The judge shouldn't pay attention to any of that. He should look at the facts, look at the law, apply the one to the other, and deliver the outcome. And if we had a judge who followed the law more faithfully than my opponent does, it would take a lot of the drama and excitement and partisan fervor out of our court system. And that would be a good thing.
Mr. Shepherd, 1 minute.
Thank you for that question. Obviously, the Franklin Circuit Court is a place where a lot of these disputes have to be adjudicated. And it is of the utmost importance that we leave politics at the courthouse door when these cases are decided. I've got a record of doing that for 16 years. If you look at my record, you will see that I have ruled against Republican legislators and Democratic legislators. I've ruled against Republican governors and Democratic governors. I've followed the law and the Constitution wherever it goes. So I think there's no question about that, it's important that we have a judge in Franklin Circuit Court who will be independent of the legislature and independent of the governor, and that's why I have pledged and have followed the commitment to not accept campaign donations from any elected officials or their PACs.
The next question comes from Mr. John Graham, and that's going to be addressed to you, Mr. Shepherd.
Both of you have kind of referred to Democrats, Republicans. Kind of with that background, the judicial races in many states are partisan races. How do you feel about that?
1 minute.
Who does that go to?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Well, I'm totally opposed to that. Our Constitution provides that our judicial races are nonpartisan. And the reason for that is that if we have partisan judicial elections, then there's no way that the court system can be truly independent. If we're electing judges as partisan officials, those judges are going to be beholden to the political party that that elects them. And that completely undermines the independence of the courts, and I'm totally opposed to that.
Mr. Bilby, 1 minute.
I agree. It's a good thing that our elections are nonpartisan in nature for our judiciary, and I would have reservations about making a constitutional change to do otherwise. Of course, such a constitutional change is made by the voters, not by the judges. So unless and until the voters make such a change, I'm perfectly satisfied with our existing arrangement. And I think it serves us well to have judges who don't owe their office or their understanding of their sense of duty to any particular party. And if I'm lucky enough to be elected, I'm going to follow the law in every case. There's going to be some disappointed Republicans if some cases come before me that have this political salience. It doesn't matter. I'm not running to be a Republican version of Phillip Shepherd. I'm running to follow the law in every single case, regardless of who the parties are.
Next question comes from Ms. Tish Shade, and it's going to be addressed to you, Mr. Bilby.
County jails across the Commonwealth are full at local taxpayers' expense. Some of these inmates need treatment, but instead get confinement. What can we do at the state or the county level to reduce the amount of expenses at our jails, and how can we reduce recidivism and get these folks back into the workforce?
1 minute, Ms. Bilby.
Well, 1 minute? Okay, thank you. You touched on a lot of topics there for me to address in 1 minute. I'll start with the recidivism part. Addiction is a terrible thing. I've seen it up close. It's an awful thing, and it wrecks not just the lives of the person suffering from the addiction, but from their family and friend network. And we should always be mindful of that. If I'm fortunate enough to become a judge, I will treat every person who comes before me with the appreciation and respect that comes from knowing that they are a child made in the image and bearing the likeness of God. Critically important, and no one surrenders that, even in the throes of an addiction. At the same time, it's also important to get the attention of people when they are serial offenders. So if a person comes before me the first time, I'm open to treatment, of course. I'm open to diversion, of course. But a third, a fourth, a fifth, a seventh, a 10th offense, it's not working if you release them to go to therapy or to treatment over and over and over again. At some point, the progressive nature of the discipline must advance until you can get the attention of that person and help them make the life choices that they need to make, whether it's treatment or some other path.
Mr. Shepherd, 1 minute.
Thank you for that question, Tish. We do find that with regard to our criminal docket and with regard to the incarceration problem we have, I would say 85 to 90% of our cases are cases at which substance abuse and drug addiction are at the root of those. So it is critically important that we learn to do a better job in treating the underlying cause as well as the criminal violations, and we are doing that in our recovery court. We used to call it drug court, but we need to have a better network of addressing the problems of addiction through public health and other outlets. And really, we found that the best treatment for addiction is employment. We need to get people involved in jobs, and there they learn the social skills and the discipline necessary to lead a law-abiding life.
Our next question comes from Ms. Annabeth Bobbitt. It's going to be addressed to you, Mr. Shepherd. You have 1 minute to respond.
Delaying foreclosures brought on by local creditors can hinder the creditor and benefit the borrower. If you are presented factual information from a creditor regarding the execution of a foreclosure, what steps do you plan to take to ensure that this is executed in a timely manner?
Yeah. Well, with foreclosures, we have had, over the last couple of years, Congress stepped in during COVID and put a moratorium on some of the foreclosure actions. And so there has been a backlog that we've been addressing. But we process foreclosure cases in a very efficient manner in this county. Charlie Jones, our master commissioner, does these very efficiently. And, and frankly, 90% of the time when there's a foreclosure sale has been postponed, it's been at the request of the creditor. So we're going to continue to do that, and if anyone has a problem with it, we'll be happy to address it.
Mr. Bilby, 1 minute.
I'll tell you, ma'am, this is by far the most common concern I've heard raised from members of the business community as I go around talking to people one at a time. And I have heard that this problem has been significant in this community to a greater extent than in surrounding counties for a long time, and that it long predates COVID. So I don't think anyone can just blame it on a pandemic or a moratorium. This is a systemic problem that originates in our courthouse. And when you have a problem that is systemic and ongoing, typically the best solution is a personnel change. So my promise to you and every other voter is that if there's a foreclosure proceeding or any other that comes along in my courtroom, I'm not going to look for some reason to delay it or sit on it or tell the parties to come back next month. I'm going to act on it promptly, because that's what the litigants deserve. That's what the taxpayers who pay the bills to run a court system deserve, and that's what I'll do.
Next question comes from Mr. John Graham. It's going to be addressed to you, Mr. Bilby. You have 1 minute.
Is it contrary to the state constitution for churches to be closed during a pandemic?
Again, several layers in your question. Any church that wants to, of course, can close itself down for any reason during a pandemic or otherwise. It is a constitutional problem when a government actor, say a magistrate or a governor or a county commissioner, tells members of a faith community that they cannot gather for in-person worship services, while at the same time allowing equivalent activities to occur in a secular setting. So for instance, at the height of the COVID pandemic, there was a situation where the governor issued an order telling churches they could not have in-person meetings for a period of time, while at the same time you as a citizen were welcome to go to a big box store or a grocery store to do something else that you deemed to be important to your life. And the ruling of our federal courts was consistent throughout the pandemic. And that ruling was, if you're going to allow a secular counterpart to remain open, then the Constitution also requires you to keep open or allow religious organizations to have the same preferential status. And I think that's perfectly agreeable as a line of demarcation, and one that I would have no problem adhering to if such a case came before me on the Franklin Circuit Court.
Mr. Shepherd, 1 minute.
Mr. Graham, could you repeat that question?
Is it contrary to the state constitution for churches to be closed during a pandemic?
I would say it's contrary to the state constitution for the government to close a church down, period.
Okay. Next question comes from Ms. Tish Shade, and that's going to be addressed to you, Mr. Shepherd.
How long should the wait be for a court decision? More than 6 months, more than 2 years, more than 4 years?
You have 1 minute.
Well, it should never, all court decisions need to be made as promptly as possible. So, it's hard to answer that question without knowing the context, okay? Are you talking about a pending decision of a particular issue?
It was just one that was submitted by one of our chamber
Okay,
members.
well, honestly, every case needs to be decided in a timely and prompt manner. So often cases get delayed because of reasons that are beyond the control of the court or beyond control of the lawyers. But however, whatever the individual situation is, the case needs to be decided as promptly as possible, giving both sides the opportunity to make their arguments and to have a fair hearing.
There's an old saying that justice delayed is justice denied. And that saying applies in criminal law contexts. It also applies to the basic functioning of a court. If you have a motion or some matter that's been waiting for a decision from a judge for more than a few months, the judge isn't doing his job right. If you have a case that's been waiting for a ruling for years, the judge is really egregious in not doing the job the right way. And I've heard that complaint about my opponent as well, that there have been cases and matters that just sit on his desk for a long time. That's not right, because you, the taxpayers, are paying for that court to exist. When a matter is fully briefed and ready for a ruling, you should have one right away. And that's what I promised to do. No unreasonable delays.
Our next question's from Annabeth Bobbitt. It's going to be addressed to you, Mr. Bilby.
What criteria will you or do you use to determine whether you recuse yourself from a case and send it to a different jurisdiction?
The criteria for recusal is set forth in two places, in statutes that were enacted by our legislature and also in some rules that were adopted by our Supreme Court. And I believe the standard states that a judge should recuse from a case if a reasonable observer would doubt that that judge could give a fair hearing or fair treatment to a matter based on something that the judge has done in the past. My opponent earlier this year was forced to recuse from a case that involved hundreds of millions of dollars in pension liabilities that every public employee who's counting on a public pension one day ought to care about, because there was a courageous attorney in Lexington who filed a sworn statement detailing all of the ways that his misconduct had violated the code of conduct for judges. So the Chief Justice of our state Supreme Court gave him an opportunity to explain, well, in the face of this sworn statement from this attorney, is it true that you violated the law? And rather than defend his conduct on the merits, he filed a brief page-and-a-half order on the Friday before a 3-day weekend where he said that he was going to recuse from the case because he wanted to avoid further controversy. But here's the thing. The recusal standard that I told you about doesn't include a desire to avoid controversy. He violated the law, and that's why he had to take himself off the case before the Chief Justice could do it for him.
I'd ask candidates, please pay attention to the timekeeper as we are trying to keep this on schedule. Our next question comes from Mr. John Graham, and that's going to be directed towards you, Mr. Shepherd. This will be our last question before closing remarks.
Do I get a chance to answer the recusal question?
Oh, did you not do that?
Okay.
Well, let's do that.
Could you repeat the question, Ms. Bobbitt?
Absolutely. What criteria do you use to determine whether you recuse yourself from a case or send it to a different jurisdiction?
Well, the criteria is set forth in the law, and it's whether there is a conflict of interest or the judge has personal knowledge about a matter that would make it difficult for him to decide the case fairly, or whether there would be the appearance of that in the eyes of the public. And so it's not whether the judge can be fair, it's whether there could be an appearance of a potential conflict that members of the public would question. So that's the criteria that is employed, and when I've been called on to review those matters, I do what is ethical and what is required, and I do that in a way that is going to uphold the integrity of the court.
We've actually reached the time for conclusion. I apologize. I thought we could get to one more question, and I thought that I was thinking ahead, so my apologies. We're now going to have closing remarks, 2-minute statements each. We started with Judge Shepherd. We'll start with you, Mr. Bilby, for your closing remarks. You have 2 minutes.
Well, thanks again for the opportunity to be with you. Thanks to everyone at home who's watching this forum. This is a wonderful opportunity for us as candidates to speak with you about the issues that are so important to our community. Let me finish where I started. I believe a judge should always follow the law in every case. Phillip Shepherd has not done that. And that's a shame, because our community suffers when we have judges who don't follow the law in every case. My promise to you and to every voter is that I will follow the law in every case, without exception. And if you want to know what other cases we didn't get a chance to talk to about today where he did that, I invite you to visit firephilshepherd.com, where I've outlined at least 4 cases, and there are more coming, that document with primary source materials exactly how it was that he deviated from the law and caused real harm to our community. When you have a judge who doesn't follow the law, there's only one solution, and that's to get yourself a new judge. That opportunity only comes along every 8 years, because this is an 8-year term of office. So right now, in the fall of 2022, is the opportunity these voters have to decide whether or not they want a judge who doesn't follow the law when he doesn't feel like it, or whether they want to replace him with a new judge who understands himself to be bound by the law and will do it in every single case. Thank you.
Shepard, 2 minutes, closing remarks.
So much. And thank you all for sponsoring this forum. Again, I'm Phillip Shepard, and it's been an honor to serve this community for the last 16 years as your circuit judge. I view that honor as a sacred trust with this community that is entrusted me with the obligation of applying the law fairly to every individual who comes before this court. So I've applied the lessons that I've learned growing up here in Frankfort, that every citizen is entitled to dignity and respect, that everyone is entitled to equality under the law, and that everyone is entitled to a fair shake when they go to court. Despite the accusations that continue to be thrown around by my opponent, I will point out that I have presided over about 12,000 cases in my career. They found about 4 that they can criticize. During the course of my career, I have done this in a way that brings, I hope, honor and respect to this community. I've been recognized by the Kentucky Bar Association as the outstanding judge in Kentucky. I've been recognized by the Kentucky Bar for service to young lawyers, and I've tried to conduct myself in a way with honor and integrity that reflects well on this community. We have the opportunity in this election to stand up for those values of honor and integrity. So I would say this, that I view the courthouse the same way I view the church. It's a place where sometimes we have to agree to differ, but always we should resolve to love each other and to serve the community. And that's been my obligation as your judge. It's what I'm going to continue to do if you give me the honor of re-electing me as your circuit judge. Thank you.
As we close, I would like to personally thank both of you for seeking this office. You've put your name on the ballot, spent your own time and money, skipped out on family events only to serve your community, and I want you to know that it's appreciated. You've both done a great job, and I wish you the very best in this election. There have been some election law changes statewide in the last several years, and there are now multiple ways to vote and cast your ballot in this election. There's mail-in absentee ballot, there's in-person early voting before Election Day, and there's in-person Election Day voting on November 8th, 2022. If you don't know where or how to vote, please call the Franklin County Clerk's Office at 502-875-8702 or check out their website. It's loaded with current election information. Voting is a right in this country provided by our Constitution, and these election law changes hopefully will increase voter turnout. It's been an honor to serve as the moderator and MC for this event, and I'd like to thank all the folks that aren't on camera for their work that made this possible. I'd like to thank the FPB staff, the chamber staff. That concludes this forum, and thank you for joining us.